Well, we're going to now be talking about engaging with young adults, grabbing their attention and attracting them to your brand. So I'd like to introduce Christos. So actually, Christos, would you introduce yourself? And actually, I think you're going to talk through a model you showed me a couple of weeks ago, which I found really fascinating.
Cool. Yeah, absolutely. If technology suffices. So there you go. Hopefully everyone can see my screen. So welcome everyone. I'm Christos Orthodoxou, Director of Innovation at the Talent People and Get My First Job. Some of you may have heard of us before, and probably some of you haven't. So bit of backdrop, like Gareth was saying, so kind of work with AAT, which I see are in the room, and quite a few different accountancy and finance firms really. So what I'll talk you through today is just kind of some of the data from Get My First Job. So Get My First Job essentially being like a LinkedIn for young people, almost at the kind of 1 million young people registered, and we've been going about 10 years. So quite a significant amount of data, which we're able to kind of process. So I've got some good news, bad news, and hopefully some quite useful tips to take away really in the grand scheme of things. So I want to start here in terms of what we're seeing in the market. So what this kind of looks at is just kind of candidates per vacancy across the last couple of years. So you'll see that kind of big spike, which is around the kind of COVID time, where everybody kind of came in and was kind of don't know how to deal with this massive influx of candidates. And everyone was quite excited almost by the volume of applications and almost a huge challenge at the same time. I think what has caught a lot of employers out a little bit, and what has been a surprise to many, is how kind of average candidates per vacancy has come down quite significantly over the last couple of years, and probably quite a lot of you can relate to kind of engagement levels and kind of application numbers really across the last few years. This data kind of paints it a bit more clearly, really. It's quite an interesting one to break down. So what the top line looks at is kind of number of applications, and the bottom line looks at the number of vacancies. So actually what you'll see traditionally where apprenticeships have been in terms of that £4 to £8 per hour mark, where maybe a lot of companies have utilized apprenticeships, that kind of quadrant of vacancies is really tightened now. So you'll see applications is almost touching the number of vacancies, whereas you'll see in the fourth quadrant, once we get in that kind of £8 to £20 per hour mark, somewhere in the region of kind of 16, 17K plus a year, is where you'll see that number of applications really start to outstrip that number of vacancies. So it's quite a lot of ramifications behind that, which I'll kind of talk you through soon. The good news, I guess, is actually accounting and finance. We see month on month actually being one of the most popular sectors, and one of the most popular interests by young people. So this just looks at every term, every word people have searched on Get My First Job. And some kind of, you'll see there accounting coming out as one of the top things there in terms of what people are searching for. So this seems to be a field that a lot of young people, school leavers, college leavers, want to be seeking out, which I think is a bit interesting, because I know quite a lot, often employers say we see it as a challenge, we don't see people interested in this field. We actually see it as one of the most popular things out there. And I'll come back to salaries in a second. So what it all means essentially is we see kind of apprentice recruitment, trainee recruitment, school leaver recruitment, whatever you want to call it, kind of bit of a longer process now. So we see it as a bit of a 5-step process. And I think traditionally, many of employers have probably been a bit more used to a 2-stage process, where you kind of put your attraction out there and then kind of select the candidates. So we're certainly seeing getting it longer. And I'll talk you through the first 3 blocks now, and I'll come back to the last 2 blocks in the later session. So the inspire bit, what does it all mean? So attraction starts before you're live. And apologies, I can see a typo already for myself there. But attraction starts before you're live. So what this means is it can be done in all sorts of different ways, really. So it can be events, it can be register your interest forms, it can be schools engagement, or social media. We see social media work quite well as an inspiration tool. And I think Chloe was touching on it earlier in terms of there are other tools which are kind of quite effective for application. So we see social media as kind of one of those really useful inspiration tools, and one of those kind of pre-live tools. So attraction starts before you're live. I think then the kind of attraction stuff really links into what Lorraine, Maisie, Zoe, and quite a few people have been saying already. So that EVP we see is quite crucial. I think we've seen a bit of a candidate behavior change recently in terms of candidates used to look at the vacancy or the job on Get My First Job and then click apply. What we're seeing now is candidates kind of viewing the vacancy and then viewing who the employer is before they then go on to click to apply. So we're seeing that kind of who that employer is a really big thing. There's been a lot of talk this morning about what young people are looking for, all those amazing benefits and all the exciting things out there. I think I would just caveat sometimes with just let's make sure we cover the basics. We see salaries are kind of one of those things which often kind of gets skipped over a little bit. And we see particularly in this sector as salary is competitive. That is a huge challenge in this sector. If you don't tell people what they can at least expect to earn, that's a huge thing. I won't go on my salary spiel, but I can't emphasize enough how important it is just to share that salary. Otherwise, you'll be playing in that kind of lower quadrant where maybe people think you'll be in that kind of £4 to £5 per hour mark, rather than that £8 plus hour mark, which I know is where quite a lot of employers are. So please, 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 super short, do share salaries before you go on to all those amazing stuff that we've talked about earlier. And just watch those acronyms. We see it all the time in this sector, but all those things we all know and love, and we've got the whole alphabet in our heads, the CFO, the B2B, BAU, MD, I could go on, A, B, C, D, F, G. They're absolutely great, and we all know them, but just watch them when it comes to your job descriptions and adverts. And then that engagement bit. I think, Chloe, you highlighted this earlier, and I'd really reinforce this. A lot of employers we see tend to want to utilize a job board approach, and actually it's a bit ironic because we're the biggest job board out there in the space. I can't emphasize enough how important targeted reach out is. So about 20 to 30% of candidates we place in the markets from proactive engagement. So really going out and talking to those candidates, just like you would in the experienced hire market when you'd approach people on things like LinkedIn or other tools. So I can't emphasize enough how important that proactive reach out is. And just to further that, we see it takes about 3 to 10 touch points to get a candidate in. And I think it was Jordan, last but not least, that mentioned ambassadors earlier. Absolutely crucial, people like me. I think I just remember to be authentic about that. I think young people often do see through sometimes when it's maybe not as authentic. So it's just remembering to be really authentic with those ambassadors and really providing those people like me. Gareth, that's it from me. I'll come back to the last 2 boxes later when we come back to recruitment.
Yeah, absolutely. And we will discuss the other 2 categories. But actually, I'm keen to come back to some of our other panelists. So maybe Maisie, actually, if I can come to you, actually, I mean, have you got any sort of top tips on what Christos has said, particularly around that kind of inspire, engage, attract, that early stage process in recruitment?
I think the inspire point is really important because I think with the new generation, we obviously see them on social media a lot. Obviously, I've mentioned TikTok multiple times, YouTube, and then there's obviously other social medias, Instagram, Facebook, that are still in use too. Now, I did some Gen Z panels last year, and I actually asked forthrightly, said, if you saw a job advert on your social media, would you apply for that job? And their answer was, I would not be on social media looking for a job. I wouldn't go on TikTok and think, I'm going to find a job here. I'm going on TikTok for something else. However, they said, if an employer is showing the best parts of themselves on social media, I'm going to start to know that employer, know the brand, know what they're about. It's going to stick in my head, and it means I'm going to watch that employer. So, for example, we had our staff party in June. We put out loads of social media content about that on Instagram. We put it on LinkedIn. I'm trying to persuade them to get a TikTok, but we'll see how I go on with that. But I just think that's the kind of engagement we want to see on social media. We want to make our presence known, but we don't want to necessarily go in with a hard sell on TikTok saying, do you want a job in accountancy? We are better to organically sell ourselves with authentic posting rather than trying to push jobs onto people.
No, I think that's a really valuable point, Maisie. And actually, some of you may have seen me on LinkedIn, but that's very much how I try and use LinkedIn. I don't try and sell through LinkedIn, but I try and create credibility. I try and create positions on some of the issues affecting the industry, which hopefully means that then if people are looking for accountancy training, they might consider coming to me. Actually, Steve, we were discussing this very issue literally yesterday, weren't we? I was wondering if you might summarize what you were telling me yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots that we can learn from history here, which is the way in which businesses or recruiters have engaged through YouTube and Instagram in years gone by, which is exactly what Maisie is saying. You can't just kind of wade into these environments uninvited with very direct information around jobs and careers. You have to be welcomed in and produce content that is ideally shareable, that's of interest to the audience that you're trying to speak with. And I think it's very important that all employers think very carefully about that within their value proposition, as to what content is appropriate there, and to actually think very, very carefully about that. Otherwise, you're going to spend an awful lot of money producing video content which you think is applicable, but actually that audience is just going to resist, and is actually going to be damaging to your value proposition. So, you know, be very careful there, and produce the content which is shareable, rather than wait to be invited in, rather than necessarily try and force it upon these particular communities. So there's lots you can learn from for example, how some of the community-based activities that you see on YouTube, for example. So Red Bull tried very, very hard to engage with audiences with lots of incredible content around, you know, jumping out of helicopters and you know, doing skiing and all that kind of thing, whereas actually your average guy in the street just wants to know how to skateboard a little bit better. So, and that goes back to what we're finding in our research, which is, you know, it's the next step stuff which is really, really important to young people. How do I get that first step, rather than how do I become, you know, the Olympic gold medalist? Because that's unreachable for most, and they just see it as being too far away. So actually, how do you engage is really important to offer the next step, and that early stuff, rather than necessarily the big superstar hero stuff, if that makes sense.
It does, Steve. Although I'm detecting some self-limiting beliefs there, Steve. I mean, one of my New Year's resolutions is to jump from a balloon on the edge of space, having watched the Red Bull version of that. So actually, Zoe, can I come to you actually now from the ICAW? Just any tips you've got for that sort of early engagement stage?
Yeah, I completely agree with Maisie where she was saying about authenticity. I feel like young people can see straight through that. That polished Instagram ready is kind of old news now. They want that real, that unfiltered, unpolished. So if you can do social media posts that are kind of from, I don't know, an employee who's got the position that you're recruiting for, rather than a polished message from the CEO, that will have a far greater impact than what we kind of saw before. And I think as well, a lot of these topics that young people are passionate about, like we mentioned, sustainability, diversity, kind of the topics that we were told to not talk about because it's quite, you know, controversial. These are the things that actually are really important to young people, and stuff that they do want to hear about your company speak about, because they ultimately are values that are hopefully going to align with them. So I'm not saying do posts that aren't part of your vision and your mission. So for example, with ICAW, everyone knows that sustainability is really important to us. We're trying to go from carbon, but trying to go to carbon zero, from carbon neutral. So that's something there to really shout about, because it's important to young people, but it's also important to your organisation as well. So it shows that they're aligning, which again we've spoken about a million times, that aligning values is really important to them. So yeah.
Thanks. So, and actually that point around kind of authentic, unpolished social media, I guess the other advantage of that is it's an awful lot quicker to do. I don't know if any of you like me have spent hours, if not days in the past, editing social media content and trying to make it look really snazzy and adding subtitles. And it takes forever, whereas if you just record something and chuck it on unpolished and authentic, it's a lot more realistic to actually get content out as well. I think being too polished can actually be a barrier to getting content out. Jordan, I come over to you actually. Just wondering about whether young people are aware of sectors and industries in their local areas. And actually, I mean, particularly say with accountancy, you know, how do we make industries sexy in schools and colleges?
Good question. So, I mean, if I'm talking about Norfolk and Suffolk, we do a lot of work, particularly around our key growth sectors. So, clean energy, digital stroke, sort of ICT. and agri-tech, and some of those are quite interesting. We've often taken kids along to BT Industrial Park's showcase suite, so they interact with robots and all sorts of cool stuff. So actually getting the students out into a workplace and understanding that is absolutely vital. And similarly around, you know, they've done lots of visits to Sizewell. I'm sure folks got their own views on that. So again, it's trying to immerse them in these environments, and also getting employers out into the schools and colleges. I mean, coming back to the point around, you know, how do you make sort of accountancy sexy and all those sorts of things? Christos was talking about authentic ambassadors, and I cannot say strongly enough, think about the people you are sending into schools and colleges, and be picky and choosy about it. You want students to not think about, you sort of want people to talk about the misconceptions around the accountancy sector. Had one of Caroline's colleagues going to a school in Suffolk recently, and he just turns up, shirt, jeans, talking about it, and was talking about the pathways and the routes into accountancy, how much you earn, all of those sorts of things. And you had not only the teaching staff, but the students who then came in afterwards, really, really engaged. And I think a lot of young people are now looking towards a lifestyle opposed to the job necessarily. And I think almost you want to go into a school and college and say, this is what it's like to work here. These are the benefits. This is great fun. And then at the end of it say, oh, by the way, yeah, we work in the accountancy firm. And I think that's the hook that you often want to go into. I mean, you still get the questions of what car do you drive, how much do you earn? But I think if you can try to angle it on those sorts of ways, it does work. And, you know, if you are an employer and you're thinking, oh, you know, how do we make what we do really engaging and interesting? Speak to one of the local careers hubs near you. You know, we've got well over 4,000, I think 4,500 schools and colleges working with us. Hundreds of colleagues across the UK, almost sort of 400 cornerstone employers that work with us as well. So speak to one of them. They'll be there to support you and say, right, actually, let's develop a lesson plan that's really interesting. How do we engage students and young people, and can support you through that? And it also means that then you don't have to go through the hassle of emailing a really scary receptionist at high school, because that can be a bit of a nightmare. So yeah, they're just some of the ways that I think you can engage young people and try to get your sector and industry across to students as well.
Brilliant, thanks, Jordan. And again, re-emphasis of how important it is for employers to make the time, I think, as part of their strategic HR plans, to get into schools, to be, you know, giving up the time. They don't need our money, they need our time. They need time for, you know, giving careers advice, for helping build employability skills, just for engaging with, you know, hopefully their future, you know, workplaces. So do make sure, and as you say, Jordan, I think it's so important you send in relatable ambassadors. The number of times I've seen presentations by managing partners who frankly are just droning on about the history of a firm, which I don't think a 17-year-old is frankly all that interested in. You know, so send in your trainees, send in your apprentices, send in your newly qualified staff who actually will still be able to relate to those young adults and be able to talk about that wider, you know, what is the work, you know, like, but also what's the life like in that sort of Maisie, actually, can I just come to you just in terms of the steps that employers can take to keep young adults engaged from a first point of contact, you know, to potentially actually walking in as a member of staff?
Yeah, of course. So let's say the first point of contact is the social media post that they've seen. You've put out a really great video of your staff going out and doing some charity work. Someone likes that. For a Gen Z, you have got 8 seconds of their attention before they've moved on to something else. So the question is, once they've seen that really great social media post, can they get to your careers page in 8 seconds? So that is something which is, I would say, take away, go back to your own Instagram for your firm and see if you've got that careers page in your bio, because that's the easiest way to get them to your careers page. The careers page has got to be easy for them to get through. And now you've got to think most of these young people are looking on their mobile phone. So is your careers page and your kind of pop in your CV, put in your details, is that mobile phone friendly? Because at the end of the day, if you lose them at this stage and they're on their phone, oh, I need to be on my laptop, they'll put that down. They are not picking it up again later. It is just the be all and end all of that as I see it. Once they've got it in, what is the response message that they get? Do they get thank you for applying, or do they get thank you for applying? We will be reviewing applications the week commencing the 13th of February. We'll be in touch then. Give them a date. Let them know when they're going to hear back from you. Then at that point, you've got to make sure that you are going to reply to everybody who has applied and got that message as at that date. Now, what we're looking at is actually bringing in a pre-worker website. So as soon as we've then got a signed contract, they will get access to a pre-worker website. And on that, there is going to be tours of the offices. There's going to be interviews with members of the team saying, right, what do we do in corporate finance? And so even if they're going to be in a payroll role, they can learn more about the firm before they start. Having then information on that site to make sure that they're ready for day one. And then also ensuring that prior to starting, they've got contact with not only their line manager, but who is going to be their buddy. So there is that open communication from the point that they've had that first interaction with social media post through to day one, and they're sat in front of you on their desk. So that is kind of our general aim for recruitment, especially with young people who really want the authenticity of knowing someone's behind the computer screen, someone's going to reply to them, someone's going to reach out. There is a name at the bottom of an email that they can always chat to during the process. Do you want me to elaborate any more, Gareth? Was that good?
That's fantastic, actually. I love that kind of structure, actually. I think a lot of employers historically have sort of neglected that period before the employee actually starts with them, but I think it's becoming so much more important to keep them engaged, keep them warm throughout that entire process, because that could be a matter of weeks, could be a matter of months, could be a matter of years potentially, particularly if we're following sort of Christoph's idea of the inspire at a very early stage. I think employers need to be committing more time to going into primary schools, let alone into secondary schools, to really sow seeds around their industry, around their sector, around, you know, the job roles available. Well, as we sort of tail off this session, actually, I want to come, we've got some experts on the call who I'd like to call now just to give a sort of top tip for engaging with and attracting candidates. So actually, Lorraine from Hayes, can I come to you actually for a kind of top tip and any observations you've got on what we've discussed so far?
No, absolutely. You know, some really great dialogue and agree with all. On attracting candidates, I'd say for me, I think that the biggest change certainly in this generation is all around that video content. I would look at written content a lot from a media perspective, but I think that video content is absolutely key. I thought what Maisie just discussed then was fantastic, because one thing I found a lot throughout my career is that candidates are lost because the process is not robust, which is such a shame. Because if you get the basics right, and it goes back to, you know, to early points, if you get the basics right, I think Christos mentioned that, so I'll get the basics right and everything comes from that. I think also, you know, we talk a lot about, about social media and TikTok, whatever, and of course that's incredibly important to drive a brand and to look at, you know, purpose on that, and to look at DE&I. But what I would say as well is, you know, you've talked a lot about this, Gareth, that connection, you know, that going into schools, that going into colleges, that actually engaging with people face to face, whether it's in the recruitment process, you know, you make sure that it's not 100% digital. I think that younger generation is very comfortable having part of the interview process, if not all, done on a digital format. But I would absolutely advise that you also get face-to-face, because people need to feel that emotional connection ultimately to really accept your position.
Thank you, Lorraine. Actually, I was involved in a discussion a few days ago with employers who were talking about they increasingly prioritise sort of qualitative skills rather than hard quantitative skills. And those sorts of softer skills they're looking for, like communication, resilience, work ethic, are so much easier to get in person in a discussion than perhaps, you know, looking at somebody's grades and, you know, what work experience they might have. Adele Conera, I know you're with us actually, and been listening to the discussion. I'd be interested in your reflections, and if you've got a kind of top tip for us at this stage.
Yeah, thanks, Gareth. So I'm Adele. I'm director of OPRA HR and Recruitment Group, and also the chair for the Essex Apprenticeship Ambassador Network. So I've been around recruiting, particularly apprentices, for a very long time. And I think at the moment, one of the key things that our members are talking about is, just referring back to what some of the other guys have said, be aware of what's out there about you, your organisation and your employees. So it's good to focus on news content going out there, but make sure you tidy up and keep track of what's already out there, because you will be Googled, as will your organisation, and just be reflective and make sure everything's clean and tidy and old posts are gone, and things that are relevant are up front. So that would be number one. Also, when looking at using social media, I was part of a group putting a lot of effort into recruiting via Snapchat a few years ago, and by the time we figured out how it might be useful, everyone had moved on. So keep up. Again, I know some of the guys have mentioned, you know, TikTok or not TikTok, and I think, yeah, my biggest advice is keep up, keep talking, be out there in schools and colleges, talk to your target audience and understand, read the surveys and do your research. And I suppose the last thing is again, is sharing everything about your organisation. And if if you're a SME or a small firm and you can't offer kegs and dog days, then look at the network around you, maybe other businesses in your building. Can you partner up? Can you do charity things together so that you can be part of something bigger that reflects your values as an organisation, and you can show off about that?
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Adele. Much appreciated. And Steve, how about a top tip from you as we tail off?
Yeah, as I've mentioned before, and Maisie's well pointed out, you know, map out that that candidate journey. Be really, really clear what you want the candidate steps to be, and also relate that to how you then onboard and induct people into your organisation too, because it needs to be seamless, and the candidate needs to feel that, you know, step one all the way through to actually joining the company has been a continuum rather than, you know, a kind of like a bit of a roller coaster. So I'd encourage you to think about that user journey as you would do for any other customer that you have within the business. It's just as important.
Yeah, I hear a lot, Steve, about candidate marketing becoming just as important as customer marketing, given the the shortages of talent and the resource limitations that so many organisations are suffering. I guess the priority is don't leave your candidates at any point wondering what's happening next. Make sure they've got that visibility and that clarity. Actually, Christos, you started us off in this session. I wonder if you might finish us off with any final observations you've got of this discussion.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm going to go right back to the please just don't forget the basics. I'm going to repeat that so often. Things like salaries, things like getting that crucial bit about who you are, all that amazing stuff we've said, like I said, is amazing, but just don't forget those basics. The other thing I'd really say as well is application numbers are great, but please, application numbers are not the be all and end all. The amount of phone calls we've had that say, how can we get to 2,000, 5,000 applications? My response is normally, why in the heck do you want 5,000 applications? So really think about what you need in that pipeline and then how to get there rather than seeing it as a target would be my final tip.
Fantastic. Thank you, Christos, and thanks to all of our contributors to this session.